Hi, this is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D. Today I wanted to address a couple of topics I have not discussed before. One is heterodoxy, and the second is love. Starting with heterodoxy. The term heterodoxy is not a familiar term to the general public. Many people have not heard of it before. If you think about it, you can probably figure out what it means. Heterodoxy comes from the same root as heterosexual. Heterosexual means other sexual, contrasted with homosexual, which means same-sexual. And so heterodoxy basically means other orthodox. It does not mean unorthodox. That's a common confusion, and I wish that that would go away, but my wishing that is not going to change it. It means other orthodox. Orthodox means right doctrine. Right doctrine. Whatever is the right or good doctrine. Doxy from the same root as doctrine. And so when we say that something is heterodox, we're not saying it's wrong, obviously, because we believe in it. We're saying that we think that it represents an alternative system of orthodoxy, or an alternative doctrine. The area in which the term heterodoxy is most commonly used is with respect to heterodox economics. Economics as a field, although it's not my specialization, so I might get some of this wrong, began as an apology or a defense of capitalism, or, in other words, of classical economics, classical understandings of what capitalism was, and so economics as a social science attempted to find ways of justifying it, justifying the idea of the profit motive, justifying the idea of what Ricardo called percolate down theory, which has more recently been referred to as trickle down theory, and so on. And since that time, the idea of heterodoxy has spread beyond just economics to encompass a wide range of different philosophies and perspectives. And so I have read all sorts of usages of heterodoxy. For example, during the 10 years in which I was, regrettably in some ways, a Trotskyist, a third camp Trotskyist, people in my old tendency referred to themselves as heterodox Trotskyists. And the reason for that was because Lev Trotsky rejected us, rejected the tendency that I belonged to. He saw it as a contradiction to his original ideas. That in spite of the fact that if you asked me, who was the guy who started Third Campism? The answer would be Lev Trotsky or Leon Trotsky. He actually wrote about it about a generation before Third Campism as a formal tendency was established. So apparently Lev Trotsky changed his mind. Now, I am no longer a Trotskyist, and so I will leave that alone. I just mention that as a way of explaining an additional application of the term heterodoxy outside of heterodox economics. So, what is heterodox Maoism? Heterodox Maoism refers to any system of Maoism, any Maoist doctrine, which is not conventional, which is not standard, which is not commonly accepted by the majority of Maoists. As with most schools of communism, or most communist traditions. Maoism is divided and divided and divided. That's true of virtually every single school of Marxism, if not all schools of Marxism. Inevitably, when you have people will disagree. In principle, there's nothing wrong with that. That leaves open the door to creativity, to exploration, to proposing new ideas. The problem is not with that. The problem is when people get so attached to an existing framework of knowledge that they become unwilling to explore other frameworks of knowledge. So, that is precisely what has happened with orthodox systems of Maoism. It is also precisely what has happened with classical economics. And so, in many places, heterodox economists will not even be hired. There is a university near me, near where I used to live, called University of Missouri, Kansas City. I forget that I don't live there anymore. I'm now in South Texas. University of Missouri, Kansas City has a lot of heterodox economists. In that way, it is rather unusual. There aren't that many heterodox economists around. I have met some over the years, mostly connected with critical realism, which is the philosophy that I use in communism and in Marxism. But aside from that, I really haven't met many other people who call themselves heterodox or who identify with one or another approach to heterodoxy. So, heterodox Maoism, and there are many of them, to be honest, is an attempt to explore other types of Maoism besides those that are seen as relatively conventional, in particular the type of Maoism which was developed by Mao Zedong, Chairman Mao himself. And so that's the reason why I call it heterodox Maoism. Now, honestly, I have not seen anyone else use the term heterodox Maoism before. Maybe they will now. I don't know. But as far as I know, I am the first person to use that term, and I think that it needs to be rescued because I think it can explain why Maoist-Third Worldists have the views that we have and why they are different in certain respects from the views of other schools or tendencies within Marxism. So that's the first thing I wanted to talk about, the concept of heterodoxy, and to plead with people to begin using that term if you are a Maoist-Third Worldist. Because I think it is a good way to describe our tendency as a heterodox tendency. Remember, heterodox does not mean unorthodox. It does not mean wrong. It does not mean bad. It does not mean short-sighted. None of those things. It simply means unconventional, or not conforming to standard views of something, in this case, standard views of Maoism. So we'll leave it there for the time being about heterodoxy and move on to another and really unrelated topic, which is love. The connection between love and Maoism-Third Worldism. To me, Maoism-Third Worldism literally makes no sense without love. I love the Third World. I go there. I go to Mexico, and I visit the Third World. The Third World is very different from the First World. When I was in Central Africa, in the Congo, which at that time was called Zaire. I was immediately struck by the vast differences between Zaire, or the Republic of the Congo, and the United States. That was my first time visiting a non-first world country. When I arrived at the airport, I was immediately robbed by customs officials. They would not give me my luggage unless I paid them off. I thought that maybe I could trick them by giving them a Barclays traveler's check without signing it, but that didn't work. They caught it, and they made me sign it before giving me my luggage. And I don't remember exactly what amounts of money they requested. Then, on the way home from the airport to the place I was staying, I had an agreed upon amount of money that I was going to give to the cab driver. However, when we got to the destination, the cab driver wanted even more, and I refused. I said, I'm sorry, but we agreed to the amount that I specified, and I said that in French. Back then I was fluent in French. I'm not anymore, unfortunately, although I probably could pick it up pretty quickly. But back then I could talk in French pretty much as easily as I can now speak in English. I got inside the home I was staying, and I told him that story. Surprisingly to me, they were both angry at me. They said, "What have you done? You have now made us a target." I said, "What do you mean, a target?" "Well, this guy's going to go around and is going to report what you did, and now we may be robbed. We need to increase our security so that some criminal, some thief, does not come and invade our home." That never even crossed my mind. Again, I was new to the third world. Now, I can understand why they were upset. I wish they weren't so upset at me. They should have realized that I wouldn't know that. If they were that concerned about it, I wish they would have told me in advance so that I could be prepared, but they didn't. Nobody told me that. And so I thought I was practicing justice. The guy agreed to an amount, but then when we got to the destination, he wanted about twice that amount. And I said, no, I refused to pay that. And I paid him the amount that we agreed to, and then I left the cab. And that was the end of it, or so I thought, until I ran into the people who rented this particular apartment. So my initial experience was probably not that good. But over the time I was there, I began to have a great love of Zaire, the Republic of the Congo. The people there were wonderful. The dances that they performed were equally wonderful. I loved Zaire. I felt bad for the people I met there, because many of them would ask me for money. And I was explicitly told by the agency which sent me not to give money to any Zaireans when I was there, because if I did, they would keep on asking me for more money, and they would tell their friends, and their friends would come to me, and it would create an endless cycle of mendicancy or begging. And they said, that is not a pattern you want to get into. They said to me, we all realize that you will have sympathy when you see how they live, and I did, but resist the inclination to give them money. But it was so hard. It was so hard. The people in Zaire, a third world country, again, very different from the world I was used to, in many cases were starving to death. I would walk down the streets and I would see people with bloated bellies, meaning they were dying of starvation. I went down to one of the main streets in Kinshasa, the capital and largest city of the country. The main street looks like any city you would go to in the Western world. Same stores, same type of architecture, except when you turn down and look at the ground and you see the dead bodies. I was with somebody the first time I walked down that street, and at first I wasn't sure if they were dead or if they were asleep. So I asked this fellow and I said, "Are these people deceased?" And he said, "Yes." And I just shook my head, just like that. He said, "Well, what happens to them?" And he said, "Well, once every day or so, there are people who work for the government who will come along with something like a garbage truck and will pick up the dead bodies and put them into the back of the truck. And then they will be buried in mass burial sites." Aside from the fact that that is such an undignified way to die, I mean, if you're dead, you're dead. So whether it's dignified or undignified, that certainly might be difficult for the family. But the country of Zaire has so many wonderful natural resources, most notably diamond mines. At that time, Mobutu was the dictator of Zaire. He is now dead. And instead of spreading the wealth to the population of his country, he kept all the wealth in his family. When you walked down the street, which I did every day, along what was then called the Zaire River, what later became the Congo River, you turn to the left and you see these heights, these cliffs, I guess. And on top of them are these huge estates. That is where the friends and the family members of Mobutu lived. When I was there in Zaire, in Kinshasa, I got a job working for an agency called Zali, which was run by the American Embassy. Zali stood for the Zaire American Language Institute. And all of my students were the people who lived in those estates on top of the cliffs. Now, they were regular people. They weren't anything out of the ordinary. They wanted to call me by my last name. I said, no, just call me Mark. And they did. They spoke very, very formal English. Like they would greet me by saying, "Greetings, sir. How are you?" And I don't know where they got that from. Who says that? Who talks that way? And I said no. I said, if you come to either the United States or Canada or the UK or Australia or New Zealand, people just say hi, or in some places, hey. But hi is good. People aren't that formal. And so from that point on, they all began to say hi. And so when I walked in the morning, they said, "Hi, Mark." And I said hi back. They were fine people. I certainly don't blame the fact that they were so wealthy on them. It wasn't their fault. They were young people. They just lucked out in being born into wealthy families. And all of them planned to travel to the West, most to the United States. And so they would ask me all sorts of questions about the United States. And when I told them that I was born and raised in New York City, they were intrigued by that, because a lot of them, that's where they wanted to go. And I said, well, keep in mind, New York City is the most expensive city in the United States. Then I almost stopped myself. I remembered who I was talking to. I was talking to extremely wealthy people. The fact that New York City is so expensive didn't matter to them. But I told them. And they nodded in appreciation for what I said. Now, my intention originally was to stay in Zaire indefinitely. That did not work out, because I wanted to finish up my doctoral studies there, and when I got there, I found out that there were no doctoral studies there, even though the university catalog said they existed. I went and met with the president of the university, who lived in something a bit smaller than the average walk-in closet. I should say his office was in something a little smaller than the average walk-in closet. And he said, well, we put Ph.D. in sociology because we plan to have it in the future. At that point, I realized I could not stay here. I had student loans to pay back. I probably should not have gone in the first place. If I was thinking clearly, I would not have gone, knowing about my student loans. But my autism was somewhat worse back then than it is now, in many respects, meaning I had a strong cognitive deficit, which is common among autistics. So I simply didn't process that information. I was so excited about the possibility of going to the third world, which is really what I wanted to do back then, and this was the late 1970s, that I disregarded everything else and just contacted the agency. Fortunately, they paid for a round-trip ticket, because otherwise I would not have been allowed into the country. And without telling them, I used the round-trip ticket to come back to New York. I'm sure they weren't very pleased, but I was not very pleased either, to be honest, because they told me, they said, well, there's this university where you can finish up your Ph.D. Not true. So I guess we both had reasons to be annoyed. I hold no animosity toward them anymore. That was so long ago. But being there, being in Zaire, Congo, taught me to have love for those people, even the wealthy ones, but especially the poor ones I would see with the bloated bellies. The dead bodies I would see, their souls, on the streets of the major drag in Kinshasa. And that is when I first fell in love with the third world. To be a Maoist-Third Worldist, in my opinion, is not just an intellectual activity. One needs to genuinely love the third world, the developing world, and the people who live in it. And although at that time in my life as an autistic, I was literally incapable of love or empathy, sadly. When much later on I was given that gift of empathy, which I now treasure, I am able to look back on my time in that country and feel the sense of love that I should have felt ideally when I was there. When I traveled to Mexico, again, a third world country, I have the same feeling. Now with empathy, now with love. I love the people that I meet there. And why not? I mean, they are people who are living, in many cases, in very difficult conditions. I would not want to have to live under their conditions. When you go into this place where I go, the water is fine, food is fine, you don't have to worry about getting dysentery. But if you leave that town, you do. And the people who live there drink that dirty water. Now their bodies are used to it, but it affects them in some way. It doesn't kill them. If I ate that food cooked in that water or drank that water, I assume I would get deathly ill. Maybe I wouldn't die, but I would certainly get very sick. So I admire those people. I admire the third world. I can see communism developing in the third world, and not just as an intellectual exercise, but out of direct personal experience, being to two third world countries, Zaire, or the Congo, and Mexico. So, if you are a Maoist-Third Worldist, or even if you're not, I would encourage you to pay a visit to a third world country. Now be careful. There are certain areas in third world countries that are dangerous. Like right on the border between the US and Mexico, you cross over and the cartels are right there. All of us who live here are warned not to go there. Some of us go there anyway, but we're warned not to go there. So I go to the safe place, the place that is protected by the military and the police in Mexico, and I'm fine. Nobody ever bothers me. I made a good friend there, runs a leather goods shop. Really, really nice guy. Everyone in that town speaks fluent English because that's their living. They also accept American money or Mexican money. It's actually better, cheaper, paying in Mexican money, but I intentionally don't do that. I pay in American money because I think that they deserve it. If I pay them in Mexican money, they're not going to get as much. If I pay them in American money, they will make much more of a profit. So that's what I do. That is what I had to say for today. This is Mark, by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D. Have a pleasant day and an even better day tomorrow.